Welcome everyone I see some folks are still connecting to audio. Might have a couple people still coming into the room. Hope everybody's doing well. As we get started, feel free to type into the chat your organization, your role, where you're currently located, any other information that you want to share with the group. And Matt, I'll probably just go through these opening slides and then we
hmm
can just go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to I think we're on session 6 of 8 for the tools for empowering teams. Just a reminder that the views expressed in today's presentation do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Health and Human Services. Always, if we want addiction destigmatized, we need a language that's unified. The words we use matter, so we never want to describe a person or the people we work with as their disease or their diagnosis. We always want to remember that they are a person first. This is our pathway to technical assistance, so anyone can here and beyond can submit a request to receive hands-on tailored support. Someone from our center would match you up with a project manager like myself, and then we'd work together to go through meeting your needs. A few housekeeping notes. When you're not speaking, try to keep your line muted to avoid background noise. When you do speak, identify yourself. During the presentation, feel free to use the chat. You've probably been in previous sessions, and we really welcome unmuting and having conversations. And then at the end of session 8, we will have a short evaluation. And this is where I hand it over to Matt. You can
All
take it
right.
away. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Cindy. Good to see all of you with us today. Thanks for joining us. And last time we talked about nominal group technique brainstorming. We spent our time exploring how to use the tools of the nominal group technique, how to use the sequence. And so we wanted to check, and I'll just do a quick review of that sequence, which was that you first do um, some silent generation of ideas, and then you ask people to round robin report out their ideas, and then we ask for clarification to make sure everyone understands all of the ideas, and then step 4 is we do some voting. All the way through in those early steps, excuse me, we're trying to avoid any forms of judgment, right? We're just trying to make sure we can encourage people and give them the support to generate ideas and be creative and feel comfortable in sharing so that we get a nice strong list. And a strong list is one that has many ideas on it and has a lot of diversity to those ideas. So I wanted to take a minute to check in and see if anyone has had a chance to use that tool, either since we talked or previously. Has anyone done any brainstorming? Anyone have any brainstorming experiences that they would like to share with us? Has anyone recently tried to use those 4 steps of the nominal group technique, and how did it go? And also, please feel comfortable and free to say, it didn't go so well, because that happens a lot when people get used to using tools. Sometimes you'll try them for the first couple of times and some things will go a little sideways on you, and then you just have to kind of think about that and try to understand the process and maybe refine it a little bit more. So happy to hear about those. Those are actually some of the most instructive sharings in terms of talking about the challenges when people use certain tools. So does anyone have anything they'd like to share related to brainstorming, either the nominal group technique specifically or more generally if you've done any brainstorming recently? I'm also checking the chat to see if anyone wants to talk about their brainstorming there. And also, is anyone planning on doing any brainstorming? I think it's one of the tools that has a wide range of possible utility. You can use it in a lot of different ways. So does anyone have any circumstances coming up where you might be able to benefit from some good brainstorming? Any meetings or events or projects or planning, uh, retreats, new opportunities that you want to think about how to explore? Does anybody have something like that coming up that might, where brainstorming might be a part of the process? Actually, as soon as I asked that question, I sort of contradicted myself in my head and said, that's not the best question because everybody has things where brainstorming could be useful coming up. Um, Everyone has things coming up where you'll be working with other people and trying to do some teaming to actively work with other people to address a common goal. And so, in any of those circumstances, you'll probably, if you want to do effective teaming, gather ideas from everybody and include everybody. And in order to have a strong team, we have to have inclusion. We have to have alignment of people working together. And so some version of gathering of ideas is useful. And so you might find that nominal group technique would be the way to help you to do that. It's a really good tool for enhancing your team's cohesion. I see Sandra said, I have a DBT presentation today. After that, I will be brainstorming. I will be brainstorming from my team. So Sandra, it sounds like what might be happening there is you'll do your presentation, then maybe you'll get together with your team to talk about how you might improve that or yes, okay, thank you. Right. Yeah. So that's an interesting yeah, brainstorming to be able to say, what could we do to enhance people's engagement in this material? What would make folks more attentive or more uh, likely to engage in using some of the material or something like that, and then come up with some ideas. And so, yeah, that's a good example. Um, Carrie says we have a team meeting every Monday, and brainstorming is always a part of that. That's great. So, yeah, good teamwork is about gathering ideas, and structuring the idea gathering is what we're doing with brainstorming. So, if you do the nominal group technique, you're ensuring that you will have balanced feedback from the whole group. Some of you maybe reflected on our last conversation. And if you think about groups or teams where you're a member that have informal kinds of brainstorming or less structured kinds of brainstorming, if you think on it, although it might not be obvious and overtly problematic, you can sometimes see some quiet domination of certain voices or certain people, or folks who share more and folks who share less,
Yeah.
people who tend to have more influence than others. Now, these things are not necessarily intentional and they're not necessarily really problematic, and they probably limit the vision of the group to some degree because we have those quieter voices where we don't see as much. Mark, what did you want to share?
Well, I didn't really have this particular, but I was in a meeting, a 2-hour meeting for a national men's organization, and we were selecting a group of a group, and it was they had a format to sort of select the group, and there was one particular person that was actually could have been carried forward into the group, and then a couple of people opted out, and some new people. And I actually, my name was in the hat, but I was sort of, I really probably should have pulled my name, but because I was in the round robin process of being voted on, I had different feelings about it. So, but what happened was we were under a time frame of 2 hours. So we had this clock sort of pressuring us. And then they were having trouble getting the votes to work out with the percentages, like above 50%. If you had above 50% of the votes, you could move forward. And so we were kind of in a stalemate. So we changed it in the middle of the stream.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the guys that were actually being voted on actually gave some input on that, which I don't think they actually meant any to skew the process. But then one particular guy did not get voted to move forward. He was already in the group that we were reorganizing, and so he sent me a note afterwards. And then what happened was they went around to all the candidates and they highlighted all the people that weren't there more, but the guys that were there, they skimmed over as far as their bio and assumed that everybody in the room actually knew them. And so there's all these variables that were sort of, and there was no malintent or anything like that. I don't mean that at all. But I think what my point is that with a structured process that you stick to, and obviously there might be some reasons to change it, but the guy that I wasn't really wanting to move forward anyway, so I should have pulled my name. But the guy that didn't get to move forward, he really had some feelings about it. And so it just, I don't know. And then we had this time frame haunting us. And so we rushed things. And so I think my point is that, and not everybody got a voice in the process. So that's one thing that this process would allow. I think that's one of the big issues, is that we don't always get a voice in the process. And then we wonder later on when the decision was made, like, or we had a chance to and we didn't take it, and then we want to complain later. But that's another issue. But so there's so many variables with these kinds of things, and a lot of ragged edges, and a lot of feelings involved, and things like that. And so I guess my point is, I think with a structured process like this, there would be a little more clarity about the process, and actually maybe even fairness.
I think for sure.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's a little more objective. I think
Yeah.
every scheme that you come up with for voting, for example, will have some consequences. Every scheme has a certain influence or impact on the process. Every way that you do brainstorming, including those earlier steps, it's important that we make sure that we see those, understand those, so that they're intentional, right? So that it's mindful and intentional, rather than, oops, we didn't realize that that was going to influence the room in this way or that way. And if you're changing as you go, you're more vulnerable to having unintended consequences. Something happened that we didn't realize would happen, or we influenced people in a way that we didn't intend to or plan to because we made an adjustment. So I agree with you. Planning and sticking to a clear set of rules creates it's, like with any game, if you change the rules of the game, remember when you were a kid and you're playing a game and all of a sudden the person you're playing with decides to change the rules in the middle of the game because you're winning if you're keeping score, and they change the rules so that they can do better, and how unfair that feels, right? And the same thing when we're adults, right? So I agree, sticking to a clear set, having agreement, right? Getting consensus. Is everybody on board with this on the front end? Here's how we're going to do this. Does anyone have any concerns? Does anyone see any maybe unintended consequences or potential challenges or issues related to what we decided to do? So that real transparent front end process where we take some time to make sure we're all good with our plan, that gives you then the leverage when you start the process and people start to drift from it, to say, pull everybody back to the agreement. Okay, we all decided we would do it this way. Are we still good with that? If we are, let's stick to our established plan, our established sequence. I sometimes even stay away from the word rules, because it can create a little bit of reactivity. I say, we established a model, we established a plan, let's stick to our plan. And then usually that works out. But your point is a really good one. There can be unintended consequences in the ways that the processes that we choose. will tend to lean the process in one direction or another. And not that that's good or bad, but it might have unintended consequences that are problematic for some people. So worthwhile to take the time to think that through up front and to really be mindful of, what does this mean? That's a great question to ask when you're planning any use of any tool. Does the way we are planning to use this tool advantage any parties, disadvantage any parties, offend any parties, create any potential misunderstandings or miscommunications among any of the people doing it? I think those are great questions to ask on the front end. I think the simple one is advantage or disadvantage, because offend is also important too, because that might be language. For example, if we're not being mindful or sensitive to any particular representative or any group, it might not disadvantage them in the process, but it might be something that is somehow hurtful. So we need to just be keeping an eye on that. So good points. Thanks for raising them. So keep thinking about the ways that you can use brainstorming and find ways to, engage in the act of teaming. Again, team as a verb as opposed to a noun, the act of teaming by finding ways to encourage participation from your groups. Okay, as we've been saying, we've been working on our 3-part series of knowing your partners and the environment and the organization and knowing your plan. And we're in this area of looking at part 3, knowing your plan and charting the course. And we talked about nominal group technique. We're going to talk about a couple of other tools today. That we talk about decision balance tool and a 2x2 matrix, which we already kind of looked at a little bit. So we'll reflect on that a little more today. So decision balance tool is what most of us commonly call a pro-con list. And most of us use these pro-con lists in a lot of different places. Maybe somebody give me an example. You can put it in the chat or out loud of a place where you might use a pro-con list for something, where there's a decision-making process and you decided to just kind of do, well, pro side, con side, advantages, disadvantages. Anybody have a way
I
that
do.
they use that?
Me, Sandra.
Go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, so I am actually a renter, and the people where I live at are selling our place where we're living at. And so we were going to buy it, but had to do a pro and cons list of whether it was a good idea on whether to buy or rent for a little bit longer and save more money.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good example of something that has clear elements on both sides, right? There's a lot of decisions in life that are usually the simpler ones that are obvious, right? I need to go buy this thing. It's on sale at one store and it's the full price at the other store. Well, there's no pro con on this. I go to the one place where it's on sale. It's the same thing. So that's easy. Those are simple decisions. More complex decisions like what you just described, buy or rent. You're going to see some pros and cons on both sides of that, right? So that's a good example. Thanks for sharing it. Vicky shared one in the chat, working from home or not. Pros of working from home, cons of working from home. Okay.
I
Did
have
anybody-
one. Actually, that's the first step of the SPIT. That's part of an evaluation.
Yeah,
And not to decide is to decide. So this is really important, how you make your decision process.
yes. Yes, not to decide is to decide. I agree. So do we want to be intentional and active, or do we want to be passive in the way that we make our decisions? In this case, we're trying to be active, right? So let's do active analysis of these things. So working from home or not? Okay, you shout them out. Pros of working from home. Okay, I work from home. I'll give a pro. I get to wear flip-flops and sweatpants all day, every day. More comfortable. That's one. And I don't have to drive anywhere, especially when the weather's bad. Okay, there's 2. Anybody else have a pro of working from home? What would it be? That's it? Nothing else?
One,
Less
the
distraction,
Say that again.
less distraction.
Less distraction. Yeah.
something that could be a pro or con is that I work from home. I have a tendency to keep working and not take breaks and work
Yes.
later.
Yes. So that could be a con in terms of the boundaries. The distraction, some items, as we see with most complex things, dependent upon the individual, could be a pro or a con. Some of you might say less distractions when working from home. I know some people who say, I have to go to the office because there are too many distractions at home, depending on the nature of their home environment, right? Who lives in it? Children, no children, ages of people, other demands or requirements or requests that are made on their time. So for some people, the office is the more sort of stable, less distracting workspace. Saving money, save on gas. People put some interesting things in the chat. Less of a carbon footprint. Doing your laundry. Yes, I do that myself sometimes. I'll throw some laundry in when I've got a break or something like that. It's quick and easy to do that. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so more freedom at home, but also you need to focus at home more, especially when you have someone else at home to distract you. I'm with the office, it helps me focus more. Yeah, so Vicky's saying the office helps to create a more of a focus. And then we're talking about individual styles and personalities. How distractible are people? There are things about a home environment that create certain distractions, things about a work environment that might create certain distractions. And how big of a variable is that for somebody? That depends on how distractible you are. You ever notice those people who can go to the coffee shop and sit there and work all day with 100 people buzzing around them, talking and chattering and ordering coffees, and they just sit there quietly looking at their computer and working, working, working? Some people don't get very distracted, even by a lot of noise and busyness. I myself couldn't do anything in that environment. I would just be constantly looking at everyone else and listening to their conversations and not paying attention to what I was trying to do. Uh, but so that's a very individualized item. So pros and cons lists are very personal, very individual. So it's interesting to think about doing them when you do them as an individual versus doing them as a team. Because if you do a pro con list for a team, some members of the team might see an item on one side. For example, should we all stay in the office or should we all stop renting our office and work from home? Some members will say, oh, it'll be much less distracting. So that's on the pro side. Other members of the team will say, nope, that one's on the con side for me because of some of the things we were just talking about. So if you do it with a group, sometimes you can do it the way we talked about the nominal group technique where you do voting and put a little mark on the item. You could come up with a bunch of items that you're going to put on the pro con list, and you can make a big picture of the pro cons, and then you can just put little sticky notes on the particular pro or con side related to certain issues. Or you can put boxes inside the big boxes of particular issues, and then people can say pro or con, particularly when it's those kind of complex items. So just checking our chat here. Work you have other people. Yep. Yeah, the issue of working with other people is a really good one here in terms of pros and cons of working from home. How do you do the water cooler conversations, which are often creative ways of coming up with solutions or learning important things from your colleagues? When you work from home, you don't have any of those informal conversations, so everything has to be scheduled and structured. So in one sense, that could be a pro and an advantage in terms of efficiencies and structure and using your time intentionally. On the other hand, there are those informal interactions that can be really important. Bonding, connecting, engaging, building relationship, and then sometimes having creative chats. Hey, good idea. Oh, thanks. You just reminded me of something that I really need to focus on, which would never have happened if we weren't in that same space. So again, these are complex things. That's why it's helpful to explore them with these lists. There's also this inverse of each side. So follow me with on this, follow me with this idea. It's sometimes a little hazy, but it's worth thinking about. So there's the pros of implementing, let's say, back to our house example. There's the pros, reasons to buy a house. And then there's the cons of not implementing, which would still be on that same time. So there's the reasons to buy a house, and then the cons of not doing it, the bad things that will happen if we don't buy a house. It's a slightly different way to think about it. What's the good things that'll happen if we buy a house? What are the bad things that'll happen if we don't buy a house? Right? So it's on the same side, right? On the pro side, it's sort of the double negative, the cons of not doing it. It's a slightly different orientation. It kind of relates to the FOMO situation, the fear of missing out. What will we miss out on if we don't do that? Which is slightly different from what will we get if we do it. For example, sometimes people might not think of, well, there's the tax incentives for owning a house. Well, that might show up on your pros reasons to do it, but it'll be more likely to show up if you say, what do you lose out on if you don't do it? Oh, the tax break, right? That'll probably show up if you frame it that way. Same thing on the con side. You've got the cons of doing it, and then the pros of not doing it. Are there reasons not to do this thing? And that's different from saying, what are the problems that will occur or the cons of doing it? What are the things what will the benefits be if we don't do this? Now, sometimes when I do this, flipping these two things, people say, oh, that just seems kind of overly complicated. So if it feels overly complicated, then disregard. But then sometimes it's just a way of rephrasing the idea, and it can give you a different way of thinking about it. So how many of you have ever done pro cons lists with your group? Have you ever done it with your group as opposed to just with an individual, yourself? Have you ever done it as a group to make a list like this? Take that as a no. People usually tend toward pro cons lists as individuals.
Unless it's like a husband and wife, like my wife and I did that with regard to the move that we made.
Yeah, yeah. So a small team, like a couple, a family, when they get together to think about what they want to do, they might make a pro con list together. Because a more diverse and complex or larger group might have a range of different perspectives. One way to use this is to have everybody make a pro con list about the particular decision on their own, independently, kind of like silent generation of ideas with nominal group technique. What if everybody made a pro con list? And then we bring them together and kind of aggregate them and pull them all together and put all the pros on one side and put all the cons on side of the collective ideas. And then if there's anything that's on both sides, maybe just make a note of that, put it in a different color or circle it or something, or draw it up right next to the other one so that you can see it on both sides of the list. Just to note that that one cuts both ways, depending on who you are and what your experiences are, which is a really important issue of empathy and person-centeredness, right? It really reflects this. These are not simple things. And even a pro-con list, which seems like a simple tool, is not if we're really being person-centered and thinking about each individual's experience. It gets complicated. The other factor that's kind of interesting is to think about adding another layer to it where you do the list and then you come up with the with fixes for the things on the con list. So it's another layer to say, okay, let's do our pro con list. Here's the reasons to do it. Here's the reasons to not do it. Are there any simple fixes for the things on the con list? Because sometimes you can say, we really want to do this. There are a few things on the con list that are keeping us from doing it. How do we fix those? Are there ways to resolve those that are relatively manageable? Let's take a minute to look through that list. Oh, there's 5 things on the con list. 3 of them we can fix really easily. They're relatively simple and easily fixed. So let's just sort of note that, and let's focus on those 2 things that are still on the con side, which would be the hard things to change. that way sort of shifts the balance a little bit, probably toward doing it, because we know we can manage those three things really quickly. I think the key here is to do that in sequence. Similar to nominal group technique, we don't want for people to put things on the con side and for someone else in the room to say, oh, no, we can fix that. That's no problem. Because that's discrediting and sort of disrespecting their addition to the con list. So we want to generate the list and then look at it collectively and say, could we resolve any of these things on the con side? Are they manageable for us? Particularly if it's something that there's kind of strong consensus, a desire to try to do the thing that you're exploring. So that's another kind of simple feature that you can add onto it. Anybody else have any thoughts about any pro-con lists that you've made for yourself that you might want to mention? Or ways you might use this with your group? Anyone have a decision or a potential action coming up where they might make a pro-con list, and could you share that with us? And you can check out the chat here. We've got some more stuff. Yes, all the smelly stuff at work that you have to deal with, and you don't have that at home. Perfumes, etc. And Danny said, yes, considering attending an event or a training, see if the entire team can benefit from the entire group versus a single or a couple of people. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about, the pros and cons around a certain training opportunity. What are the advantages and benefits? Sure. Anyone else have any, excuse me, any other ideas you're thinking about related to how you might use a simple pro-con?
I don't know if I have any ideas, but like I've done this before, but then there's still there's still no it's still more of a analysis of what to do after that, unless there's some big glaring thing that pops up. So we still have to make a decision about what to do, even though it might not be even clear after that. But so I think the one thing that gets in the way sometimes, like, is emotions. Like I remember before I moved across the country, I weighed the pros and cons of that. And didn't really consider the cost of living out west, which was probably as much as I could have. But also there's a lot of fear involved in some decisions that, I mean, you can still put that down as a pro and a con, I guess, but sometimes those kind of things keep us from, that factors in, either disproportionately or it actually can guide the decision making. So it's that's a little bit harder to gauge, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mark. I think a lot of what we're doing with several of these tools is to try to think clearly, to think rationally. We want to be inclusive of our emotional experiences and to make sure that we're not being driven by a strong emotional reaction, a fight or flight or freeze kind of response, an anxiety-driven response. If it's a fear-based response, how do we try to be as objective as we can be, and then of course to incorporate, as you said, for example, moving across the country, that will be scary, however you want to define the word scary. There are stressors and challenges to doing that, right? So that should be on the list, right? It's definitely more stressful than not moving across the country, right? And that's not to say that that's a bad thing. And maybe there are ways you can think about that as part of a pro as well, an opportunity to stretch and do new things and challenge myself in ways that I haven't been challenged. And so that's the con side of that stress. So it ends up on both sides. So your point is, one of your points there is, does this deliver a clear decision? If an issue is complex enough to warrant a pro and con list, it's probably complex enough to not have the pro and con list result in a clear and exact vision for what you should do. If it's something where you make a pro and con list and you go, well, it's very clear that I should do this and not that, you probably wouldn't have needed to do one to begin with because it was a relatively simple and obvious choice, right? If there's a car, if you're on the road and you're standing on the walking across the road and a car comes toward you, we don't need a pro and con list to know we need to get out of the way. We know certain things are just good and safe and the proper path for us. And so the result of this will probably not be a simple, obvious yes or no about the decision, but hopefully what you have is more clarity and a more rational decision making. You're including more rational consideration and a more inclusive process if it's involving other people, right? We get everybody's ideas, which will hopefully help us to think about it more clearly. Scott, what did you want to add?
Yeah, I was just there's not a upcoming decision to be made, but I had a recent situation where and this is my personal life, but um, where I didn't go through and write a pros and cons list, but there was just a lot of unknowns regarding like a car repair. It was expensive, like engine would have to be taken out,
Right.
um, and you know you can kind of isolate the issue, but there's some unknowns along the way, like this is what it would cost to fix if this is the issue. But along the way, there might be other things discovered. And
Right.
so it was kind of on the tipping point between do I sell this and have it be somebody else's project car and just take some money from it and invest in something new, or
Mm-hmm.
do I have them fix it and drive this car for a while? And there's
Yeah.
just a lot of different factors that come into that with a car that's, a little bit older and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was a complex kind of decision to be made.
Yeah, and it's a good example of a complex decision that has a strong emotionality to it because when the mechanic says, "Oh yeah, we can do this for you," it'll only cost, $5,500 or something, and you're like, "Yipes! I thought it was just going to be $400. What's wrong with my car?" And there's a strong emotion to that, right, in that moment, and so the pro con could help with a little bit more objectivity and more rational kind of thinking through and avoiding that strong kind of panic-based decision making that can happen with things that are more expensive than we thought they would be or that are, financially challenging. So, yeah, I think that does. The pro con helps us to sit back and kind of think about it rationally. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been helpful for me to try to put into part of the process is like, all right, there's unknowns in this.
Mhm.
And the point of this is to come to the best decision that I can come to.
Yeah.
And it might not be the optimal outcome, but sometimes learning through trial and error is the way, like, to do it. So I have to make
Yeah.
some type of decision. So it's
Yeah.
okay to get to a
That-
point and be okay making a decision. Like I might not be able to figure out necessarily the right or wrong in every
yeah.
situation.
You're raising a really good point, which is that there are unknowns. This is why we are exploring the pro con list and we're making certain assumptions as we explore. Uh, the word probably comes up a lot in pro con list. Well, probably if I do this, then that will happen. And probably under these circumstances, this will happen. Or it's likely that I think this will. There's a lot of unknowns in every pro con list. That's why they don't elicit the absolute crystal clear, obvious decision. They just help us to get a little clearer. The water's murky, and hopefully it creates a little more clarity to the water, but it doesn't get it to the point of crystal clear. There's still a lot of unknown territory in there where we're basing our list making on what we think to be the case or what we think to be most likely. And there are assumptions in there. Right? We're unsure, which is, the nature of our experience in many ways, right? We can do our best to get clarity, but we're always going to be a little fuzzy on most things.
Well,
All right.
Matt, I just wanted to add to the going back to uh, what you and I always talk about is in these recovery-based organizations, how do we bring our teams more fully into decision making that happens in traditional or traditional nonprofits. Sometimes it's just the leader or a leader in their executive team that kind of makes the decisions, and then staff and volunteers fulfill, have those things delegated to them, and then they fulfill their tasks and duties and things like that. And so this is really, in addition to being a great way of kind of exploring all the options out there, it's a way to help our teams more fully contemplate all the considerations that need to be made and what might appear on the surface as a simple decision.
Yeah.
So like when I was running an RCO, we would do some of this work because the people, the staff would say, "Hey, Chris, we have this great idea. Let's do this." They'd be all jazzed and wonderful, and I could see the 30 things
Mm-hmm.
behind the curtains of why it may not work. And versus just saying no, it was like, "Hey, let's bring this to a team meeting and
Right.
let's flush out." And I didn't do it I did it authentically. I wasn't doing
Mhm.
it to prove them wrong. I
Sure.
wanted to see like something in you is saying we can do this. So help me see the pros of implementing and then the cons of not implementing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I think that's a really good example, and it brings up, I think, a motivational interviewing spirit related to how we interact with each other. Sometimes leaders will, with good intentions, say to the team, "Hey, here's the thing that we should do. I found this," or "Here's an opportunity. I think we should do this because here's my list of all the reasons. Are you with me?" Right? Which is kind of a powerful position that the person has taken and said, "We should do this." And again, usually the intention is to engage people in that moment, but you're basically telling them what they should do and why they should be supportive of it, as opposed to using a pro con list, which is used a lot with a motivational interviewing kind of style of conversation, right? We see that a lot where we say, advantages, disadvantages to changing something or doing something new. What do you think? So in that case, as you described, the leader is bringing the issue, or either the team member has brought it to you or you're bringing it to them and saying, "Well, here's something to consider. How do we feel about this? What's the upside? What's the downside? How do we manage those downsides?" And then we get to have dialogue and have different opinions. And that may lead us to doing it, not doing it, or doing something else or some other variation of it, because we're having dialogue and we're creating as we go, right? Rather than what happens when it's just the simple process. Here's the thing, I think we should do it. Then it just becomes a yes, no. Should we do it? Should we not do it? It's really not a dialogue anymore. We're not exploring. We're just kind of simplifying it to a yes, no. And then I like to make the distinction between a dialogue and a discussion. In that case, it's a discussion where we're just batting it back and forth. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, rather than creating, right? Let's have a dialogue where we're creating new ideas and new ways of exploring what we could do and what might be helpful for our future. That's a very different thing. And what you just described gets you to that, gets you to dialogue, which I think is great. So, I would encourage you all to think about how you might use the pro con list. I think it's a pretty useful tool. I think that that's probably where we might want to wrap up for today. We'll just kind of leave it with that. We have another tool or two that we'll explore in the next couple of meetings that we'll be sharing together. I want to encourage all of you to, you know, go make a pro con list about whatever it is you want to make one about.
Thanks, Matt. Well, we have two sessions after today, so session 7 and 8. Always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Matt or myself. And otherwise, we will see you next week at the same time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Thanks.